Hello, my name is Dylan. Today we're going to demo the first part of the workflow I use to import miniatures into Tabletop Simulator using a process known as photogrammetry. The process begins with photography. You're going to take about 50 pictures of your mini. You don't need any artistic talent for these pictures. You don't need to be Ansel Adams, but you do need to take consistent and technically good photos. My setup, I have a black background made from poster board. I have some cheap LED lights I got on Amazon. I made some flags for the lights. Those things tape to the light that reduce the light that spills onto the background. I have a turntable made from foam core, which I screwed to a block of wood. I have a guide glued to the foam core. I got the guide from another gentleman's website whose written tutorial I followed when I was starting out. I'll provide a link to that. The guide is marked off in 25 increments. I think that's 12.5 degrees each increment, and you'll use the guide to take two sets of 25 photos, right? So we're taking a picture and then we're rotating our little turntable a little bit and then taking the next picture, etc. Let's see, the camera I'm using is a Nikon D5600. It's nice to have a DSLR for this, where you have total manual control over everything. I'm using an old 60mm macro lens. Again, macro lens is not required, but it certainly makes this easier. The camera is mounted on a tripod, and I'm using a cable release, and this allows me to do some long exposures and also keep the spatial relationship of the camera to the subject consistent. I would say that the tripod is definitely mandatory for this. I won't attempt to explain photography. There are probably a lot better tutorials and lectures on photography out there. But you can see my settings that the light meter is telling me I'm way underexposed, but it doesn't know that everything in the frame, almost everything in the frame, is black. Right, so I find that when my light meter in the default light meter mode says I'm 2 stops underexposed, that is actually when I'm about perfect. And of course, the settings will just vary on your lights and your camera, etc. So you kind of have to work that out. You might be able to do this with a cell phone camera. I learned photography back in the days of film before cell phone cameras, so all the manual photography stuff is actually easier for me than using a cell phone to take pictures. I think that the tripod part, like I said, is mandatory. You'd probably have to come up with some sort of timer or something for a cell phone camera to replace the cable release. Again, it's important that the camera, like its physical position, is consistent right throughout all your photos. So we take 25 pictures at a low angle, almost 90 degrees to the mini, right? And then we do another set, raising the camera up just a bit. We do need a lot of overlap, though, between those two angles, about 60% overlap, meaning don't go too high. Most of my early failures were caused by the difference in my two sets of photos being too great, right? I was trying to take pictures kind of maybe down, looking more at the top of the mini's head, right? But that's not really necessary, because you can capture the top of the head just fine by just raising the camera up a little bit. So you can see in these two pictures that the angles really aren't that different. Okay, so at this point I have taken my pictures, right? And we're going to just copy them over here into a folder. So just looking for these. Here we go. These are the ones I just did. Our little wizard. We normally do, well, I've to date done mostly historical stuff, but I thought I'd mix it up a bit here, do some fantasy models. So I'm just copying all these guys over into a folder that we've set up. You probably do want to set up a folder structure for your photogrammetry projects, right? I kind of have my own way of organizing things, but I wouldn't pretend to tell you exactly how to do that, just that you should try to. It would be easier for you if you made up, some sort of folder hierarchy to kind of keep this stuff organized. All right, files are copied, so I'm going to go over to 3DF Zephyr here. Here's Bognar. He's the last guy I did the process on, but we're going to start with a new one. And I just went up to workflow, new project. I'm not going to save the last workspace. I'm going to say no to that. I've already got a obj of Bognar. Let's go in my folder structure here. Let's see, fantasy, humans, wizards, photos A. So I'm selecting the folder and looking here. So here it has the 50 photographs. So 3ds Zephyr, the free version, has a limit of 50 photographs that it can use in its workflow. You can use obviously more with the paid version. However, 50 has always been plenty for anything I've needed to do with it when it comes to scanning miniatures. Just clicking next. So here on this page, by default, the first time you launch 3ds Zephyr, right, you'll have the presets, which we want to change, right? So I went to advanced. There was the option. Let me just pause just a moment here and check my own reference doc. I was just saying what you need to do is while you're running to edit these settings the first time you run this, and it's a good idea to have a reference document open, right? You can create your own. Maybe I'll put a tutorial or something like this. Maybe I'll kind of put a version of this document at some point on my website. I got it from someone else, right? There's another tutorial that I followed. It was a gentleman who was going through a process to import infinity models, right? And over time I learned a little more about it and kind of modified it for my own needs. But it's a good idea to have the document open to kind of compare against as you're doing this, right? So I know that I need very high, fast. Let me just check these. Global, bounding box disabled, definitely, and approximate grid. I won't get into the particulars of each one of these little things. I don't claim to completely understand them myself, right? Yeah, we'll just move on from there. Okay, so now we're ready to do the first part of the process, which is to create a dense point cloud, I think it's called. So let's hit run here. And this is going to take some time, so we'll come back when this is finished. It, I think on my PC, takes about 10 or 15 minutes. It's all kind of dependent on your hardware. It's fairly CPU intensive and GPU intensive, right? So the more cores you have and the more, I don't know if the same concept quite applies on the GPU's threads or, I don't know. The better your hardware, the faster this will run. My graphics card here, this GTX 960, is pretty old actually. My CPU is semi-respectable still. I think it's like some Core i7 with 4 gigahertz cores, but we'll just let this run and we'll come back when it is finished. Okay, so we've finished the first stage here. We should have a nice dense point cloud, right? So this is showing us all of the photos, right, that it was able to use when constructing our point cloud. Everything says yes and is all nice and green, right? If it had a problem with one of the photos, it might have said no here, or would have said no, and then you could look at that photo and maybe try to figure out why it failed to use that photo. I'm pretty good at this, I want to say. So far, I've kind of got my my workflow down pat. I've had some issues with it in the past as I was kind of learning things, and often if the photos didn't have enough overlap between them, right? So we talked earlier about having a sequence of photos taken at, you know, one angle that's almost dead on to the miniature, right? And then another sequence that is sort of a little higher angle. If you go too high on that higher angle, or if the two sets of photos, the difference in the angles is too great. There's got to be some geometry word for that I don't remember from school, right? But the difference of the two angles, is it the vector? I don't know. The difference between those two angles, if it's too great and there's not enough overlap, then the software here doesn't really know what to do with them, right? It needs quite a bit of overlap. It needs sort of 60% overlap, I believe, is what the documentation on this thing says, between photos to match up the point. So that's one of the things, right, that can go wrong. But it does take a little bit of experimentation in setting up your photography, right? The photography is important. So let's go ahead and click finish, and hopefully everything worked out as well as I said it was going to work out. Looks pretty good here. We've got our bunch of points, right? So now we're going to set up a bounding box. I'm going to click on the bounding box thingy up here, and we're just going to move this in. So bounding box is just going to tell it to only look at what's inside the box for the next steps, right? So this is a way to, maybe it speeds it up. Honestly, I haven't done a comparison of, you know, bounding box versus not doing the bounding box and measured it out with you know, with science, right, to see if this actually helps. But this is something I always do, right? So we set up our bounding box here. Note, I'm not going right up to the miniature. I'm not making it as small as possible. I'm leaving some of this stuff around it, right? I don't know, that's usually easier to do. You don't want to clip off any part of the miniature, so it's better to have an oversized bounding box than a bounding box that is too small. All right, let's close our bounding box tool. This is another little gotcha with this software. If you have a tool open, it won't let you click on another tool, right? So it's good to just be in the habit of, when you open a tool like the bounding box, right, to close that tool. So we're going to close the bounding box, go up to workflow. We're ready for our next segment here, which is 3D model generation, right? So I'm going to go through this. We're happy with all of these settings, although we can let's see here. I have my photogrammetry tutorials here, but yeah, let's take a look at our reference document just to make sure we still know what we're doing. And I think we do here. We're looking for low, blah, 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 blah. My document is already a little bit out of date, but that's okay. Okay, this looks, oh, what are we doing? Okay, so we're good here. Let's just click that next button. And again, checking our reference, right? We're good on all of these settings. Won't go into all of these. Again, I do not understand what all of them do. I've played around with some of them, but it's all good right now. So let's go next and click run. Okay, again, this is going to take a little bit of time, so we will pause it here and come back when it is finished. Okay, so we're back and we have completed another stage in this process. I'm going to go ahead and click finish, and we should have something more exciting to look at. So let's see how this turned out. All right, here's our wizard. It's got his book, looking pretty cool. Okay, good, success. This means our photography and everything was all good. So now we need to get rid of some of this extraneous stuff, right, that we do not want, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is remove some stuff with the plane tool here. So I'm over in editing, going to by plane, right? There's a little blue line in here that I'm grabbing. We're just moving the plane down, and we've got some decisions to make, let's say. So decision is really, are we going to keep this basing material, or are we going to try to get rid of it, right? So on this guy, I don't know, I do like to get rid of it if I can. Some of my bases are not very clean. These are older models. If I were creating these bases specifically to do this process with, right, or rather painting up the miniatures sort of fresh, I would do the photography portion before I added anything to the base, right, so that I have a nice clean base, and that makes everything a lot easier. But if you're like me, chances are you've got a lot of miniatures that you'd like to do this with, but you know, you weren't thinking about photogrammetry when you did it or when you set up those bases. So you might have tufts and Lord knows what else on your bases. I certainly put a lot of crap on my bases. So on this guy, though, since we do have the room, or we do have, I think, a good opportunity to remove some stuff, so I am going to try to clean off all this basing material. So I'm just going to go right up to the bottom of the shoes here, right? Put my plane there, going down to update. So it selects by default everything above our plane, right? But I'd want actually what's below, so I'm going to click on invert and then delete. All right, now here he is, looking pretty good here. Let's just clean up some of these little bits of snow and whatnot. So we're going to go over to the by hand tool. Let's go with a polygon selection method, and we're just going to select some of this stuff and delete it. And let's see here, we click on pause so we can move the camera around again. Moving the camera around using the middle mouse button, hold down the middle mouse button and you can pan left and right, or if you hold down the left mouse button you can rotate, right? Okay, let's keep working here. You want to be careful with this. If you, I mean, anything that you cut off, right, is going to leave a hole. And I'll show you what I mean maybe here in a second. So, again, things are kind of nice and flat here, but we're kind of making a jagged line here around the shoes. It's not so much of a problem when you're working down here around the model's feet, right? Because nobody really looks at that stuff, right? No one really is going to zoom in to this part of the model and like, oh, let's really check out the shoes on this gentleman here. So it's, yeah, I don't know, it's more forgiving if you have like a little hole down here. But if you're working anywhere in the top of the model, and for some reason you're deciding to clean some stuff off, like, I don't know, if we have a little jagged bit here, this is not the program to try to kind of edit that. You might be able to take care of some of that stuff in Blender, which I'll show in another video, I think. But let's continue working here and just removing our extraneous little bits from the base that we don't want. Let's just delete that. And delete that. And I think we're looking pretty good. Pause the tool again. Oh, we got some little weirdness over here. Let's get rid of that. Good. Delete. And we got some rocks and whatnot here. I don't know. I think that's fine though. I think I'm just going to leave that. Again, from the angle at which you're viewing this sort of thing in Tabletop Simulator, right? You're usually looking at the guy from like up here or higher, right? So again, the little itty bitty details down around the shoes, not so much of a big deal. Okay, so now that our model is cleaned up, we're ready to go on to the next steps. So we're going to do some filters here. So I'm right clicking on my mesh, go down to filters. First we're going to do the retopology and clone and apply. So retopology, it's evening out the triangles. I don't know, trying to make all the faces maybe of a similar size, I believe. And I must admit that I'm sort of blindly following the original tutorial, right, when I'm doing the retopology part, because I'm not exactly sure what would happen if we didn't do this. I do know from editing what little I know. I do know from what little I know about editing models that if the faces, right, if the polygons are of similar size, it makes that a lot easier, but I'm not really sure if it makes such a big difference, but it doesn't take long to do, so I'm going to continue to do it. Now we're going to decimate. So again, we're doing this for Tabletop Simulator, which has a limit of 25,000 vertices. This is a model that we're going to use probably as an individual. I'm going to scale him down to 20,000 maybe, and we might scale this down a little bit more when we get into Blender, but for now I'm going to use this value. Again, it's a limitation with Tabletop Simulator, 25,000 vertices. The more vertices that you have, the more complicated the mesh is, the more software has to think about it, right? So, you know, the more polygons you'll have, essentially, the more faces. People who are making games, right? I mean, they're trying to limit that, right? They're trying to reduce the polygons. It improves the performance, right, of the game. Again, we're probably not, it's not the end of the world to have this a little higher, right? As long as it's under the limit, most likely. Kind of depends on the kind of game you're playing. If you're making figures for a mass battle game, right, where you're going to have maybe hundreds, maybe 500, maybe 600 figures on the screen, then you want to reduce that maybe even more. Maybe we want to go down to 10,000, right, for infantry, or really as low as you can go. And it always depends on your hardware a bit as to whether or not that impacts performance. When I first started out with this, I was definitely a little greedy on the polygons, right? I was kind of doing everything at the maximum number of vertices I could get away with, right? It didn't seem to affect performance on my computer so much, but maybe it does on some of the people I was playing with who had some older hardware, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and decimate though. Clone and apply filter. Always choosing clone and apply filter because then we can go back, right? If we didn't like what this did, if we're like, oh, this took away too much detail, you know, we could delete this filter step that we did under remove there, right? And then we could just do it again with different values. Okay, though, so now that looks okay. Again, it's going to look better after we do the textured mesh, right? So this isn't really like our final texture on this guy. The textured mesh will show that. So let's go to that next step. Textured mesh generation. All right, and we see that it's picking from the last thing we did, right, which is the mesh 1, filter 1, blah, blah. This is after we did the decimation. Next. Okay, max texture size. This is, again, a Tabletop Simulator thing. This is the maximum texture size, so you want a texture that is this size, you know, 2048 by 2048. Image resolution, we can go down a little bit on that, actually, from what we've got there. And we can leave everything else, I think, the same. Okay, let's go to next and run. All right, I don't think this takes quite as long as the other steps. Again, though, it's not that exciting to watch. Maybe, I mean, you can turn on this stuff, the graphs and the logs and whatnot with these buttons. I don't know. I turn it on. It's provides some entertainment maybe. But we're going to go ahead and pause the video here and come back again when this is done. Here we are. We're already done. Well, that was fast, actually. So, finish. Here he is, looking pretty good. You can see that we got some of that detail back. It's really the texture that does so much of the work, right? So what I mean by that is that the mesh, with its little details, the mesh, when we look at the mesh in Blender here, next, we'll see that the mesh looks really blobby, right? It looks like if you take away the texture, this is a pretty blobby mess, right? But the texture really gives us all so much of the detail on these guys. So here we are, last step. We're just going to export this now to an OBJ file, which we're going to import into Blender. So picking OBJ, export normals, export single texture, texture size again 2048 And let's click on our export. Let's go to the folder we've set up for this guy, Wizards, and this is again my naming convention. I'm going to call it Wizard A. Okay, and there we go. All right, so now we're ready to do the next step, which will be in Blender, where we're just going to maybe clean up a few little things, like we could take out this little white spot there with some texture painting, maybe do some more optimizing with some I think that the decimation algorithm is actually better in Blender, but okay, that's a wrap on this one. If you made it this far, I appreciate your patience, I guess. Hopefully you've seen that this isn't actually that hard. It's really more like following a recipe than anything that's extremely technical. I don't know, or maybe you've been completely frightened off by what you've seen so far. In the next video, we'll go into Blender, and I'll do some things to modify the model and get it ready for Tabletop Simulator. Thanks. Bye.